everyone! In this video series we present some key findings from a new study called Shipyard Nuclear in Finland that Rauli Partanen did for the Modernist Society of Finland. Let's start from the basics. Rauli, it seems like 2/3 of global electricity is still made from fossil fuels. What should we think about that?
Well, there's still a lot to do. I mean, as you can see, coal is still the king, and the average coal plant in the world is just about 14 years old, and we are still building more. And many countries are also building gas turbines, which also use fossil fuels.
Okay, surely the situation in Europe must be better.
Well, it is. So in Europe, 2/3 of electricity comes from low carbon sources, with just 1/3 from fossil fuels. So as we can see, nuclear is the biggest source, followed by wind, hydro, biomass and waste incineration, and then solar. Especially wind and solar have been growing, but we also need nuclear to grow as well. Wind and solar have their issues with the reliability, and nuclear is a good way to add reliable but also low carbon electricity to the grid, and this will help replace coal and gas.
Thank you, Rauli. Please subscribe and learn more about Rauli's research. Thank you.